Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, education lovers. Welcome to the program. So excited to have you here on this installment of Big Ideas in Education. I'm Ryan Carella from Doral College, joined as always by Dr. Sarah Boulos-Fye from Somerset Academy Schools. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
And as we did last week, and it was such a big hit, we knew we had to do it again. We are joined by a guest panelist this week who's going to share his insight on the stories of the day. We have Eric Sheninger. He is an author, speaker, educator, and the associate partner at the International Center for Leadership in Education. And many of you also know him as the former award-winning principal at New Milford High School, a transformational leader, changed the learning culture of that school. And so we have so many different places to go with him and have him share his insight on these stories. And so we're excited to have him here. Eric, thank you so much for being on.
Oh, I need that introduction every time. Great to be here, Ryan and Sarah.
Thanks for being with us.
We should also note that Sarah's, not Sarah, although one of these days you will be presenting at one of these things, but Eric is going to be delivering a keynote talk at FETC 2021. This year's Future of Education Technology Conference will be an interactive online event from January 26th to 29th, and it's free for attendees. You got to love that. You can find out more by visiting FETC.org. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show, but first, Sarah, let's get us started. What story do you have this week?
Thanks, Ryan. We've discussed on this show before how in the midst of innovation and support that schools have been providing throughout the pandemic, there's still a serious digital divide that exists, and schools are facing the reality that there are students unaccounted for. In an article in EdWeek recently highlighting the efforts to find and help such students, they claim, quote, an unknown number of children and youth, as many as 3 million by one estimate, have not had a meaningful connection to their schools since in-person learning was disrupted in March. And that's March of 2020. And as we're now in 2021, you can do the math on what a scary thought that is. Unfortunately, the number of students that are unaccounted for is difficult to pin down since no one organization is responsible for tracking that data. Efforts to find and work with these students to help provide them not only with academic resources, but many of the other resources that schools support children, families, and communities with have been ongoing. It's important to know not only who is missing from school, but why. And school districts and cities are going to have to go in search of these answers before they start designing solutions, says Haley Norm Corman of Bellwether Education Partners, an organization that has been working to figure out the amount of students that are still missing. Outreach programs such as one conducted by Youth Build USA, a program working with 16 to 24-year-olds who have dropped out of high school, are working to provide alternate education programs such as those in partnership with Penn Foster, a distance learning education program. Together, these organizations are providing job and academic training, which may be more attractive to older students who are facing financial or other hardships right now, but still wish to reach their academic goals. For instance, one St. Paul, Minnesota social worker texts the children in her caseload every day to remind them of a daily plan and resources available to them, a strategy that has gotten pretty consistent results. And Schoolhouse Connection, an advocacy group for homeless youth, has compiled a list of suggestions for schools, including visiting local motels and campgrounds and leaving flyers on cars and under doors to provide information about resources and services available. There are obviously a lot of factors at play that school leaders need to be considering right now that go above and beyond whether school is taking place in person or virtually. And I'm grateful that these resources exist to help us be more aware of how best to reach these most vulnerable populations of students and their families that need our support in this time. Now, Eric, I know you've done a lot of work with school leaders. What have you been seeing as far as engaging students and families since the pandemic began?
That is a fantastic question because as I work with more and more schools, especially urban districts, that is probably the number one challenge. And, some of the ideas you presented were fantastic, but you kind of mentioned that, it's a all hands on deck mindset. And
Absolutely.
we have to look at all the methods that are at our disposal, everything from social media, I've seen parent academies set up using Facebook Live, where they're doing live town halls weekly, notifications, not just in email and remind, but using the student information system to push out information, virtual events, even using games like bingo where there's swag attached to get families and students engaged. But then you're talking about the digital divide, looking at paper flyers and actually taping them to the door handles of the homes,
Right.
creating infomercials, public service announcements. I've even seen schools use yard signs
Yeah.
and put it in front of the students' homes.
Yeah.
But one of the best ideas I've heard recently is leveraging houses of worship. What they
Okay.
have found is that they can reach families and students because they are going to houses of worship. And I really think that is an untapped resource, because when we talk about ELLs, English
Hmm.
language learners, go into the houses of worship where the service is speaking in the target language. Great idea.
That is a great idea. And I'm thinking especially because a lot of families, especially low income families, English language learning families, families of students with disabilities, they depend on the schools for a lot of, like I said earlier, non academic resources, right? So thinking of what other community centers provide resources and where they might be going, that hits it right on the head. Houses of worship, any other kind of community center that's outward facing for families that's going to provide that, so that we can make sure that schools are getting to the families. And I think that's a big concern. I know all of us are concerned about academics, but I know for a lot of us that work in urban school districts, like you mentioned, school is not the only thing that kids come to school for. And that's really what I think a lot of us are worried about, making sure those kids and their families have the resources that we provide to the communities.
As you mentioned, other places is local businesses as well. You could put
Yeah.
that information in.
I think the big lesson to be gained from all of it is the same thing that's going to help us reach these students now during the pandemic is probably a lot of the same approaches that you use when you're just a principal of an urban school generally, Eric, which is it's a multi-stakeholder effort. It doesn't begin and end at the school, but rather schools need to work with religious organizations, government services, social workers, public and private businesses, nonprofits, anybody who might have a touch point with this student. They need to be called into action here to make sure we can keep track of these kids and that they're accounted for during this difficult time.
Yeah, and we can add to the list alumni groups,
Mm.
parent-teacher organizations. But like we said, you kind of went through a vast amount of resources available. But we also talk about, well, why are the students not
Mm-hmm.
attending? And another big
Exactly.
piece that you mentioned, Sarah, is people need people, and
Mm-hmm.
many students have not logged on because they haven't felt a part of the experience. And that's why we have to create equitable conditions for learning, where students that are remote are getting the same experience as those kids that are face to face, but also the opportunities to engage in discourse and communication. The key is, if kids don't understand why they're learning and how it's going to help them, then they figure, well, why even bother? So I think that relevance piece is so even more important right now.
Absolutely. Because it's harder to feel connected.
Yeah.
I mean, and how
And
much of this is
breakout.
just a technological gap, by the way?
I think it's really hard to engage in those real-time conversations without technology. It is. Can we assign tasks that get kids to think and apply their thinking in meaningful ways without tech? Yes, we can get them to read independently, answer scaffolded reflective questions. We can have them engage in projects. But here's the challenge, human nature is we are social creatures.
That's right.
And students have been isolated, and that has caused some to really, um, I guess, be negatively impacted by the social emotional aspects of that isolation. And we could say a lot of things about technology, pro and con, but when we think about the pro, the ability for those students to interact with their peers, you cannot put a number on that in terms of importance.
It's a great point. And I think when it comes to technology as well, is, some of us, especially those of us who live in urban areas, I think there's a level of expectation with regards to technology that we have that doesn't always come across when we're talking about more rural areas. So, yes, we live in an urban area where even if you are impoverished, for the most part, you still have access to some technology, right? So some technology is going to be available because just from the density of people around, we have more access. But when we're talking about more rural areas where the infrastructure is not supporting the kind of technology that you need, even for, for sending text messages or accessing over your phone and having Wi-Fi or anything like that, again, it goes back to what they mentioned here, which I think is a fantastic point. Step one is who's missing, but why,
Yep.
right? And understanding those situations, which I know this is something we could spend a lot of time on because there's just so many different areas that we could tackle. And we could keep going. Ryan, what do you want to mention today? What do you want to bring up for us?
I'm glad that you brought up the story that you did, Sarah, and I think that my story really links into it because it gets into the same idea of people in a school being disconnected from others because of what's happening right now with the pandemic and what we can do to fix that, because ultimately that kind of connection makes schools and the school climate more beneficial. So we've spoken a lot on this program, Eric, about cultivating effective student-teacher relationships and why that's important for affecting a positive school climate. But a recent article has noted that there is another type of friendship that is crucial to effective schools, and that is a type of friendship that's often ignored, which is friendships between teachers and other teachers. So there was a story in Mindshift last month that talks about how schools benefit immensely from friendships among adults on staff. The article notes that teachers who build friendships with their colleagues are less stressed, less prone to burnout, and have a more engaged student body. Unfortunately, much of the day-to-day realities of teaching, as you can all gather, make these relationships hard to build. Teachers are in a non-pandemic environment, teachers are operating in classroom environments where they are often the only adult in the room, which isn't conducive to fostering relationships with other educators. And these isolating effects have only become more pronounced during the pandemic as many teachers are working remotely and are not interacting with their colleagues as regularly. So how can we create an environment where these sorts of relationships can thrive? Well, while the article does caution against collaboration initiatives that seem too forced and top-down, it does note that administrations can play a role in encouraging encouraging teachers, to get together for social outings and establishing things like buddy teacher programs. And these can provide big benefits for schools because, quote, research has tied administrators placing importance on relationships among adults on campus with increased levels of openness, trust, and comfort, which in turn lead to improved school climate, increased teacher retention, and decreased teacher resistance to initiatives. I can't tell you how glad I am to have the award-winning principal here with us, Sarah, who I'm sure in his day has had to foster quite a few initiatives on connecting teachers together and building those relationships. What do you think of this, Eric?
Well, first off, you just identified the number one thing that teachers want and need, and that is time. And as we think about that, when I first went in August and I was in a school district, I had teachers crying and yelling. Now, they weren't yelling at me, but they're like, Eric, we need more time. And administrators can do two things. They can help teachers think about how they use their time, but they can also free up time. Number one, grant time. Find ways to give teachers time. Build in flexible schedules. Here's another great idea. How about we eliminate meetings and go digital and put it in emails, because no teacher enjoys a meeting that doesn't have purpose. Thinking about eliminating non-instructional duties that some teachers have. That's what I did as a principal. I eliminated all the non-instructional duties my teachers had by contract, and myself and my admin team did those duties in lieu of them, so they had time during the day, every day, to collaborate with their peers. Administrators can cover classes. They can go in, set up a schedule, cover a class, and free up that teacher. Again, no strings attached. Collaborate with your colleagues. Be innovative. Thinking about offering mental health days, grading grace periods. I mean, a lot of things that we can do, and even giving them the choice of, not only in the professional learning, but who they can learn with. So a lot of great ideas that I'm seeing implemented right now.
So it sounds like a key component to fostering teacher-teacher friendships isn't as much having to sort of force them together, like, oh, go all hang out at this outing. It's just, if you give teachers more time, they will just inherently collaborate with each other.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when we force some of those collaborations, it has the negative impact. And again, I'm not saying those are not good avenues, but sometimes just because the way people are, but time and really providing the coaching and feedback on how the time is used. Yes, we want teachers to collaborate, but we also want them to be open to the feedback in how that collaboration is leading to improved instructional strategies, innovative pedagogical techniques, innovative assessments. So, I think the time and the feedback, because it's not just the teacher to teacher relationships. We also want to build the teacher to administrator relationship and teacher and administrator to student relationship. And all that can be done with time.
Now, Sarah, I don't want to give short shrift to the fact that you literally wrote your dissertation on this topic. You are the resident expert on fostering teacher relationships and mentorship. And I imagine this article has really resonated with you.
It is. And it's funny you brought it up because not only had I read it, I had friends send it to me and say, hey, this sounds like your research. So yes, it definitely, definitely resonates with me. And I think, Eric, while you bring up a good point about time, I think something that kind of is going in between the lines of what you're saying is sometimes administrators need to get out of the way a little bit or create a space where teachers can have more organic relationships. Like you said, forcing it is not going to work, right? Just like any teacher would tell you, if I force these two kids to work together and say, okay, and now you're friends, right? Two kids who didn't really want to work together before. It's not, excuse me. Not the best way to go about it. But sometimes getting out of the way and allowing those organic relationships to form, you'd be surprised with which teachers collaborate with each other. I think that we try as school administrators to do things, creating like common planning times or department meetings and things like that. And they're very well intentioned or buddying people up. But again, it's sometimes kind of forced. So listening to what the teachers can get from those relationships and what is provided, and hearing what they really need from those relationships. Time is 100% a huge factor. Sometimes they need emotional support. Sometimes they just need somebody to vent to and talk about. Teaching is a very, like you said, Ryan, a very isolating experience because even pre-pandemic, you go into your classroom, you close the door, you're the only adult there. Those are all real factors that can cause some serious issues if there's somebody who's even coming from maybe the regular corporate world and then goes into teaching. You hear from some of them like, this is a weird environment, right? We have to ask to go to the bathroom because this is not a normal adult experience. So really helping teachers to find a way to organically build relationships with each other. I love the idea of cutting out meetings and things like that and providing more social spaces in schools because that's definitely key to this. And I think something that comes about when we're talking about right now, where a lot of the things where principals might be doing, like let's have, we're going to get lunch for everybody and have them kind of be able to mingle together at lunchtime or do something for them on a Friday or, some kind of camaraderie build, opportunity may not seem as feasible right now. Something that I've been seeing a lot lately is for teachers who are creating kind of virtual after school spaces for each other. Of course, they have time for students after school, but also for each other, where maybe every Wednesday after school, we're going to get together and anybody's allowed to come. Administrators are not allowed to come, and they'll have kind of just Zoom rooms where they talk to each other or virtual happy hour or something like that after school or Fridays that they'll say, let's all just get together and hang out and you can talk about your family, you can talk about your students, you can talk about whatever is on your mind and giving them those spaces to really just be human, I think is really the issue, is that they don't really have a chance to be having a normal adult experience.
And I'm glad you brought up some of the digital pathways to collaborate and build those relationships. Because right now with social distancing, I work with some schools and they're not comfortable with face-to-face, which is fine with
Absolutely.
me. But, you mentioned like Zoom, you could do the same thing in Microsoft Teams, but using tools like Voxer, where they can
Right.
create their own groups, whether it's push to talk, video, little walkie-talkie like app. But there's a lot of different ways that they can do that digitally, still collaborate and build those needed relationships, but also get the support in the many areas that you mentioned.
And
Oh,
something
that's
that's interesting is that these kinds of relationships, they do lead to better outcomes for schools and for students. And that, I think, is something that it's like, well, it's nice to say this, but do we have the time? If you're thinking bottom line, these are absolutely behaviors and actions that will lead to outcomes for students. And that's what's amazing about it. Is it's some people might think, oh, that sounds good, but do we have time for that when we're thinking about all of these other needs? I mean, thinking about the fact, like the article I mentioned, we have students who are homeless. We have students who have all these other issues. Well, guess what? When you have teachers talking to each other and building relationships and understanding these elements of what's going on, they're also thinking and talking about their students. It happens. I know that all of us as educators have had the experience where we bring a significant other into a group with educators and they feel like a fish out of water because they're like, all you guys talk about is your kids. It happens, and it's absolutely a way to make sure that we are getting to those outcomes we want to see.
That's great, Eric. Eric, last word to bring us home?
Yeah, I'm really excited to play my part at FETC coming up. And, the whole idea is we're talking about some of these elements, which are many, is how we prepare educators for the unknown. And, we do know the pandemic will end. And the key is, are we ready to really think about the lessons that we've learned in order to improve? Because here's the thing, we've seen amazing practices implemented by educators. Yeah. We've seen people step up, but we also know that we can ill afford to go back to the way we had always done things.
Definitely.
And, when we talk about equity, personalization, where all kids get what they need, when they need it, where they need it, we can really move to those more personalized practices that we're seeing now as a result of hybrid and remote learning. Improving infrastructure, the power and need for students and people to connect, looking at not just finding time, but how we use time, especially with our learners. And, understanding that, who knew that Canvas, Schoology, Google Classroom were going to be so instrumental in creating an equitable learning culture for our kids. So, I'm really excited to talk about some of the changes that schools are implementing at scale and how it's positively impacting kids that will really lay the foundation for some pretty exciting changes in order to keep growing in our wonderful, wonderful profession of education.
I'm really excited for FETC. I'm thinking back to a year ago before the pandemic started, and we're talking about all of these amazing products and opportunities that could happen, right? And now it seems like just so obvious that these things have already taken a hold, and now we're talking about a very different future. So I can't wait to hear your keynote, Eric, and I can't wait to hear more about what's going on with everyone who's going to be a part of FETC.
Another reminder, folks, this year's FETC will be an interactive online event, and best of all, free to join. The event will be from the 26th to the 29th, and if you want to learn more, go to fetc.org. Just one of the many things that you can enjoy in FETC is going to be our guest, Eric Sheninger's keynote address, and I know you don't want to miss that. We certainly don't, because all I can think from just hearing your insight today, Eric, is, boy, I want to hear more. So I know I know Sarah and I are looking forward to it, and I know the listeners/viewers are looking forward to it as well. Thank you so much for being on this week.
Oh, it was great talking to you both.
Eric, if someone's listening and wants to learn more about your work and what you do, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm not a hard person to find. You Google my name, you'll get all my social media, but my website's a one-stop shop, ericsheninger.com, and all my information, links, resources are there.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for listening to Big Ideas in Education. We'll see you next week.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.